Association's happy to help organize and sponsor and host this on our Zoom and really connect with many of you. We'll be joining and listening and learning. But at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Carl to give a little bit more.
There's too much shit going on here.
End up turning it to our speaker.
Now I need to turn it down.
I'm going to ask if you can remain on mute for the duration of the presentation. Really just help with background noise. We'll certainly be monitoring it some too. And Carl can speak to you about when questions would be most appropriate. Thanks, Carl.
Thank you, Kendall, and thanks to the association for hosting this again. And look forward to having the recordings from all three sessions and getting those up and posted. As Kendall talked about muting, my dog decides to start drinking water in the background. But yes, we have the three sessions, 2 sessions today and 1 tomorrow morning. That makes up the 2 different courses in the listing for the Virginia resource concerns. This morning we have natural heritage. This afternoon will be Department of Wildlife Resources. And then tomorrow morning, the Department of Historic Resources, which all 3 again make up the requirements for certification for your conservation planner, as well as receiving your contact hours if you're already certified. So if you did not sign up for this afternoon or tomorrow morning and you need those 2 sessions, make sure you follow those links to get registered, and let me know if for some reason you don't have it and do need those links to get there. Again, put your name and district in the chat if you would, please, so that we know who all is on, especially if you're multiple people around one laptop or one screen. Today, as we go through, if you have questions as we go, put them in the chat. I'm going to try and monitor that as we go. And I think Renee generally kind of stops here and there for questions as well, but we'll try and keep everybody on mute and ask through the chat until we say you can unmute and ask questions. So with that, I thank everybody for joining us. And Renee, if you want to take over and get started.
Sure. Thank you, Carl. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Great. Well, I'll just quickly say good morning, turn on my video, and I'll turn this off once we start through the presentation, but appreciate the opportunity to share Natural Heritage Data Explorer and other information with folks this morning. As Carl mentioned, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I can also stop at any point and answer questions as needed. So again, thank you very much for joining us today. So today I'm going to talk about natural heritage data and our online tool, the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, that all of you or most of you are probably familiar with. And so with that, I want to just kind of give an introduction about natural heritage, in terms of what we do and our information, so that you understand when you're looking at our online tool what you're actually seeing. As probably many of you know, we are part of Department of Conservation and Recreation, the agency. We're one of many divisions within that agency. Other divisions include state parks, recreational planning, trails and grants, dam safety, floodplain management, land conservation, soil and water conservation, of course, and then natural heritage. Our mission is to conserve Virginia's biodiversity through inventory, protection, and stewardship. So what that really means is we focus on rare resources, whether it be a rare plant or a rare animal or a rare natural community. And it could be exemplary example of a particular common type of community, like oak hickory forest, or an actual rare type of natural community. And then we also track and identify significant caves and karst features within the Commonwealth. So pretty broad-based at what information we're providing, and it could be on any of these different resources that we actually track. So to give you a little bit of background about how we go about tracking resources, as I mentioned, they have to be rare for us to have them on our radar for tracking. And so when we talk about rarity, we're talking about rarity within the state. Are they rare within Virginia? But we're also talking about global rarity. And the way that we know that is by working with a company called NatureServe, which is a nonprofit that works with all the Natural Heritage Network programs to gather all of the data that we currently have, both within the U.S. and North America, as well as South America. And so there's an international focus on this also. And with over 100 network programs, both here in the United States, Canada, and Latin America, we are trying to compile all of that information, and based on that information determines how we determine global ranking. And so that's going to be important as we talk about what resources we're tracking later on. So let's talk about the Division of Natural Heritage within DCR. It's made up of 5 different sections: inventory, natural area protection, natural area stewardship, information management, and environmental review. So our inventory section is made up basically of biologists, including zoologists, botanists, ecologists, and what they're trying to do is a comprehensive statewide inventory documenting the location and ecological status of rare plants, animals, and natural communities. Their mission basically is to go out and find and document these locations and identify and record the condition of those natural heritage resources. They work both on public and private land, and we do inventories from time to time on a contract basis for localities and other entities. That information is then brought into our biotic system, which is our database, where that's managed. It's both widely used within the agency as well as externally by federal, state, and local governments and other land and resource managers. And we develop a variety of publicly available data tools, including maps, including databases where we can share them digitally, and of course the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. We also have the natural area protection section within our division. Basically, they're charged with protecting habitat based on what inventory is identifying as rare, and they're working with landowners through education, resource management plans, the Virginia Registry of Natural Areas, conservation easements, and then outright purchase of land or gifting of land to try to protect habitat for natural heritage resources. And you see 2 of those examples here. Unthinks Cave is a natural area preserve in Lee County, and we also have South Key Sandhills Natural Area Preserve in the city of Suffolk and Southampton County. For protection of these various lands, we actually have what is known as our natural area preserve system. You see that we have currently 66 natural area preserves throughout the Commonwealth, shown here on the map. Basically, we have some that have public access, and we've made facilities available like parking lots, kiosks, and so that supports people actually coming to those preserves on their own and exploring those preserves. We also have preserves that do not have that public access, and you see those denoted by the red dot there. And they still are open to the public. They just have to have some kind of permission from the stewardship that's overseeing that particular preserve due to management activities such as prescribed fire and so forth that may be going on throughout the year. So again, not having the parking lots, not having the kiosks or maps of the preserve available readily, but also by contacting the steward, you can gain access. So our natural area stewardship section, they manage the natural area preserve system that protects natural heritage resources, including over 800 map locations of 500 unique rare plant and animal species and natural communities. And this includes development of management plans for these natural area preserves, because I mentioned previously, we may be using prescribed fire, invasive species control, as well as other management techniques to have those resources remain viable and protect the habitat. And also, these natural area preserves provide opportunities for research and education and compatible outdoor recreational experiences. The stewardship section and stewards throughout the Commonwealth provide expertise to federal, state, and local agencies, and also private landowners. And then the section that I oversee is the environmental review section. We're basically charged with project review, where we're looking at projects being proposed and determining impacts to natural heritage resources, and then recommending ways to avoid and minimize these impacts. We currently review about 3,000 projects a year. Within this section, there's also the locality liaison position. It's funded through DEQ, through the Coastal Zone Management Program, from a grant. And this position works with local government and other conservation partners to encourage, comprehensive use of our natural heritage data for decision making, whether it be in a comprehensive, plan that they're working on, or that they're doing environmental screening on their own. And this is focused because of the funding in Virginia's coastal zone as defined by DEQ. So I just wanted to mention what kind of projects we review. This is something we do on an annual basis. As you can see here on the slide, we do receive projects from various requesters. It could be a federal agency, a locality, private individuals, nonprofits, of course, soil and water conservation districts, consultants, the Department of Environmental Quality, the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, DOF, Department of Energy, Department of Transportation, and many others. So as you can see, in 2022, we reviewed 2,952 projects. So we're remaining about 3,000 projects a year. So we stay pretty busy. So let's talk for just a moment about the rarity ranks, because as I mentioned initially, that's what determines whether we are going to be tracking a particular resource or not. And as I mentioned, there's both global rarity ranks and there's state rarity ranks. And then on top of that, there's listed status. As many of you know, we're non-regulatory. We work very closely with our regulatory partners, but we are non-regulatory. So again, our focus is going to be on that rarity rank. And so we are looking both globally as well as on the state level, and depending on how rare something is determines our tracking of that resource. As you can see here at the bottom of the slide, G1 or S1, global or state, critically imperiled, meaning maybe 1 to 5 known populations in the world, we're considering that a G1 or S1. G2, S2, 6 to 20 populations, we're feeling like that is, of course, imperiled both on the global level, if it's a G rank, or on the state level. And then it kind of goes from there, G3, S3, G4, S4, G5, S5. And for those folks that get comments back from us, you're seeing this information once we identify the resource that we are providing comments about. And then, it's the common name and then the scientific name, and then you see those ranking values. You can see maybe salamander here at the top left. It shows it's a G4. So it's, apparently secure on the global level, but within the state, it's pretty rare. It's an S1, S2. And sometimes we have combinations of those ranks because we're not sure exactly where it's falling into. So that's why you see the S1, S2. So it's fairly rare on the state level. NL in that next slot means it's not listed on the federal level, but LT in that last slot means it is listed threatened on the state level. So that just gives you kind of a sense of how these rankings kind of occur and that they're associated with the resources. And when you see letters back from us, that you understand what they mean. I'll just mention also on the right side here, American Blue Hearts. Again, you're seeing the common name, scientific name. You have a G5 question mark, meaning, again, we feel like it's globally secure. The question mark means that it may have some uncertainty around its actual status, whether it's a G5 or G4. But then again, showing it on the state level, it's fairly rare, as we saw with the maybe salamander in S1, S2. But then notice there's no legal status on the federal level in L or on the state level in L is representing non-listed. So those are just two examples, but I'm sure you've probably wondered when you've gotten comments from us, what do all of these letters and numbers mean? Well, that's really what we are focused on in terms of whether we're tracking a resource or not. And then the distribution of natural heritage resources throughout the Commonwealth. We're tracking about 3,800 rare animal populations, 4,400 rare plant populations, 1,800 exemplary natural communities, and then around 379 significant geologic features. And you can see those displayed there on the map. Normally you see the distribution, certainly more concentrated of these resources in the east as well as in the west, not so much in the Piedmont just because of all the agricultural activities that have happened over the hundreds of years, but there are still some there. And again, please understand we have surveyed a small amount of the Commonwealth. I think someone told me a couple years ago it was about 10%. So there's still a lot that we don't know. So I just wanted to give you a subset of just a smattering of resources that we're currently tracking. I know some of you will be familiar with some of these different resources, just to give you kind of just a preview of everything that we're looking at. So hellbender, as you know, this very, very large salamander found in the western part of the state. The wood turtle found in Northern Virginia, that is listed threatened. You have, of course, freshwater mussels. These are just a few examples. The green floater listed, state listed, the James spiny mussel, globally rare G1, S1, endangered both on the federal and state level. And then you're seeing yellow lance there. We also have rare plants, smooth coneflower occurring in Augusta County in normally disturbed areas, again listed both on the federal and state level. Rusty patch bumblebee found in Rockingham County, Augusta County. This is listed on the federal level. You see LE endangered there, and showing that we do also list insects as we work with the Virginia Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services in proposing particular resources to be listed. Roanoke log perch, again listed both federal and state. Virginia sneezeweed there in Augusta County in those drawdown ponds, you'll normally find this rare plant. Again, a state rare S2 and showing listing both on the federal and state level. And then, as I mentioned, we also track natural communities. As you can see from the listings there, that none of our natural communities have any legal status associated with them, meaning they're not listed on the federal level or the state level, but they are globally and state rare. As you can see, the Central Appalachian pitch pine bog is a G1S1 occurrence of this particular community. And then you have Central Appalachian pine oak heath woodland on the right there, and it's globally and state secure. We have more occurrences of this, but still considered rare. I also wanted to mention karst features. I mentioned that's something that we also track. We have a karst team out in Christiansburg that's dedicated to the conservation of karst resources here in the Commonwealth. I had already mentioned Unthanks Cave earlier is one of our natural area preserves. Madison Cave isopod being listed both on the state and federal level. All of you probably have heard about white nose syndrome. And so various bat species such as northern long-eared bat, tricolored bat, little brown bat have been listed because of this and has decimated their populations to the lowest in, hundreds of years. And then we are tracking also sinkholes. That's one of the karst features that we identify on NHDE through a data layer from Department of Energy. It used to be DMME, showing where those sinkholes are that we know about. It's certainly not comprehensive, but that is certainly a window to a lot of different karst features and is an important resource that we try to protect. So why not just listed species? As I mentioned, we're not regulatory. We are working, as I said, closely with our regulatory partners, but please understand that there are resources that are not listed that are actually rarer than the resources that are listed. There's quite a process that you have to go through to get something listed. And it's a multi-year process. And so that continues to be a challenge for us to get these globally rare species listed on the state level. So I'll just kind of do a real quick breakdown to say why this is important that we provide information to you beyond listed species. As you can see, we track 377 G1, G2 species and communities, the rarest of the rare globally, and we have 214 plants and animals and 163 communities. So out of the 163 of this 370 are communities, and I mentioned to you, none of these are listed. That is not something that the Endangered Species Act, whether it be on the federal level or state level, actually identifies as a resource that would be listed at this point. 42 of the 377 are federally listed. 24 of the 377 are not federally listed, but are state listed. So out of the 377, that leaves 311 G1 and G2 natural heritage resources that are unlisted. So these are the rarest of the rare based on the information we currently have from NatureServe, and they're not protected. 93 of the non-listed G1, G2 species and communities are known from only 2 or 3 locations in the world. 140 of the non-listed G1, G2 species and communities are only known from 1 location in the world. So the conclusion from all this is the fact that if you only protect listed species, then you would actually potentially allow for the extinction by development projects or what have you of 311 globally rare species that are currently not listed. So that is very concerning, and that is why you see when we provide information to you, we're providing information on all natural heritage resources that we track, not just listed species. So let's talk about, our basic screening layer that we use, the conservation sites that we have identified in-house from our biologists drawing these polygons around documented occurrence or occurrences of natural heritage resources. So those areas, and these are what you're going to see on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, and this is what you're also seeing in our comment letters when we provide comments back to you. These areas on the land are enclosing one or more natural heritage resources. And they're also including the surrounding habitat or buffer necessary to protect the resources. For instance, for use of management techniques such as prescribed fire, or for buffering from invasives, or buffering for water quality. And so we currently have 5 types of conservation sites in Virginia. We have a terrestrial conservation site, which includes lands with non-aquatic above ground element occurrences, those point location occurrences, GPS located occurrences of resources. We also have karst conservation sites, which includes lands with associated element occurrences with caves and karst. We also have our new stream conservation sites, or SCS, that designate stream reaches with upland buffers associated with aquatic element occurrences. I need to mention that again. This is new. We're in the process. We're in a day or two of releasing this, and you'll start seeing this soon on the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. I'll talk a little bit more about the differences between what we currently have, which is known as the stream conservation units, and what our new stream conservation sites are going to look like. Finally, to finish up the 5 types of conservation sites in Virginia, we also have a migratory animal conservation site. I think about this on the Eastern Shore. We have migratory bird stopover area that incorporates most of the Eastern Shore. And then we also have anthropogenic habitat zones. And these are kind of man-made areas that are supporting resources. I can think of borrow pits for amphibians and other man-made structures that actually provide habitat. I want to mention to you, which I was mentioning before, we were focused on the element occurrence level when I was talking about maybe salamanders, blue hearts, wood turtle, hellbender, smooth coneflower. Those are occurrences that we're tracking. These conservation sites are surrounding those occurrences and containing buffers to try to protect and make those resources viable into the future. These conservation sites do not have any legal status, and most of them also do not represent protected lands. So please realize that the conservation site itself doesn't have a legal status, but the resources associated with the conservation site may have a legal status. So let's talk about the stream conservation sites. And like I said, I'm working today and, trying to get this pushed out onto NHDE as live updates. And so you're going to be seeing these in the next couple days show up in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. What we have currently, as we speak right now, are still stream conservation units, and those were basically a 1 mile upstream and 2 mile downstream from the documented aquatic occurrence. Those are now being replaced by the stream conservation sites. And they encompass stream and river reaches, water bodies, and terrestrial areas, the upland buffers containing or associated with aquatic or semi-aquatic element occurrences, including upstream and downstream reaches and tributaries up to 3 kilometers stream distance from the actual element occurrence. So this is a difference. Before, we had a 1 mile, 2 mile, 1 mile upstream, 2 mile downstream from the documented occurrence. You're going to see a little bit more of a limited upstream downstream distance with the 3 kilometers. However, we are now capturing the uplands that are adjacent to the stream, or adjacent to the creek, or adjacent to the river, or adjacent to the water body, that are so important in trying to prevent sedimentation coming into the water body. That is now captured in the stream conservation sites. And I know it may be hard to see, but on the left at the bottom, there's an image of the stream conservation units basically staying within the banks of those water bodies. But as you can see on the right, the stream conservation sites that are coming soon, those are showing beyond the banks and actually including some of the uplands on either side, trying to protect water quality based on what activities are being proposed there. So these upland buffers are within 150 meters of flow buffers. We use catchment basins to do this. So this is going to be a change you are going to see in HDE in the coming days. All of our conservation sites have a biodiversity rank, and that biodiversity rank is based on rarity of the resources. The quality of the resource, is it one plant or is it 1,000 plants? And then the number of the natural heritage resources actually associated with that conservation site. And this is based on a 1 to 5 scale, B1 being outstanding significance through B5 of general biodiversity significance. And this is the biodiversity ranking table showing how those ranks are determined. We have these now automated within our database Biotics, where as we make changes to the rarity or to the actual quality of the element occurrence, it changes the rank automatically. So as updates are being posted to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer every 3 months, you will see changes in these ranks of the actual element occurrence, but you will also see changes in the biodiversity ranking for the conservation sites. And this is just a distribution of the conservation sites and the stream conservation units. I left units. This will change on our next training. We will show the actual conservation sites, stream conservation sites, but you can see they're very similar to the element occurrence distribution we looked at earlier. A lot of focus in both the east and the west of our conservation sites and stream conservation units. So what are the uses of these sites? Well, we absolutely know they're used for screening for project for potential impacts. As I mentioned before, localities and PDCs use them for planning purposes. Our protection group, as well as land trust and others, use them for targets for acquisition and easements. They certainly guide priorities for restoration activities such as wetland banking, and they are key factors in our modeling that we've done for Virginia Conservation Vision and Conserve Virginia. So it's really our foundation for providing information about natural heritage resources, and they're used in a lot of different ways. We also, beyond documented occurrences, we have developed over the years 179 predicted suitable habitat models. Those models have been developed through using environmental variables. Some of them have up to 80 predictive layers that run a special software that determines where there may be suitable habitat for that particular resource based on those environmental variables throughout the state. It is an output from modeling. So of course it's important for whatever environmental variables that we're using to be accurate to the best of our knowledge. Of course, these change over time. And so at each quarterly update to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer, there may be a change in a particular model. So you might have received a comment on small world begonia a year ago, but now you're coming back to us for an update or phase 2 of a project, and now there's no comment. And it's because our data is constantly changing, and these predicted suitable habitat models can also change. Please understand that the model output is really showing where this could possibly occur. There are probabilities associated with those models, and we actually use a certain threshold to say, this is what we are using from an environmental review perspective to actually determine if there is actual potential for a particular resource. Normally what it triggers us to recommend a survey. You will see that language that, based on the DCR predicted suitable habitat model for small world begonia, we think there's potential for that resource to occur if there's suitable habitat on site, and then we will make a recommendation for survey. So that's really what that is our basis for. Now, I do want to mention that with these, if there is an intersect with a predicted suitable habitat model for a particular resource, it doesn't automatically mean we're going to recommend a survey. It is then given to inventory to our ologists to make that determination by what they know about the site, what they have in-house, whether they've been there and looked before or have any additional knowledge. They will make that final call. So please understand, just because you get feedback saying there's a predicted suitable habitat model doesn't necessarily mean we're going to recommend a survey. It's dependent on what we hear back from our inventory staff. So with all of that said, I know most of you on the call are familiar with the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. That is our ArcGIS server-based interactive mapping application that's online after the project is sent through the conservation suite module. If there is a hit, then this is the next step in terms of sending the project in for review to determine if we have any concerns for impact for natural heritage resources. There is an extensive, robust user guide that is associated with that application. Basically, it is under the Help tab up on the right-hand corner of the actual home page, and throughout, if you're in the map viewer, you'll see it there persisting. You can just click on that and it'll open up this PDF. We are updating this as we update information on Natural Heritage Data Explorer. For instance, there will be information about stream conservation sites as we release the updates on NHDE in the next day or two. So please understand, this is a great resource. If you have questions, check here first. But then if you can't, figure out what's going on or have additional questions, always feel free to reach out to us. And we will definitely provide any information we can to help you answer the questions you have. So these are just our conservation sites. Like I said, they look a little bit different than they have in the past. You still see the blue conservation sites there. These are the terrestrial sites we were talking about. And then in the magenta, in the pink, you see that the stream conservation sites have kind of grown in terms of getting a little bit fatter, being wider, because they're now capturing some of the upland areas adjacent to the water bodies. As I mentioned, 150-meter buffer. And this is just showing our identify tool showing the actual natural heritage stream conservation site, giving its attribute information that can be identified, similar to what has happened in the past for stream conservation units. We also comment in our letters about ecological cores. This is under our conservation planning models. This is representing 100 acres of more of natural cover. And normally we're talking about forests, but it can be talking about marshes. It can be, dunes. Natural habitat is what the focus is. And our concerns with this is that we see impacts when these large areas of natural cover are impacted or dissected. Some will say that is fragmented, that we see invasive species coming in. When that happens, we see predator effects on the edges. You lose some of the ecosystem services that you had before when you're, breaking up these large contiguous areas. So we have modeled this, and as you can see there on the slide, C1 showing in red outstanding ecological core, and a general of G5 in the dark green being of a general significance for an ecological core. But these are throughout the Commonwealth. We've identified them. We comment on them if we feel like the proposed project is impacting these cores. We have determined for C1 and C2 cores, if they're being impacted, again, through a direct impact or sometimes secondary impacts, that we would recommend an impact analysis. I don't believe that anyone has seen that from the letters that we provided for soil and water projects, but just be aware that this is something we're looking at. I'm sure we have mentioned from time to time about impacts to cores in general, but doubtful we're looking at C1 or C2 core impact. So this is just another recommendation we're making in reference to impacts to natural cover. As I mentioned about predicted suitable habitat layer, you can see the summary model there in NHDE, showing basically where there are concentrations in the dark green, high, more than 5 species potentially occurring, and then lower areas where less than 3 species. That is something that's also in NHDE. And then our screening coverage, as I mentioned, and I did change this to reflect the stream conservation sites rather than the stream conservation units. As you all know, if through the screening in the conservation application suite actually intersects a natural heritage resource, the next step is to submit it through the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And when you do that, you receive this table as one of the report items that's telling you what is within the natural or within the project area. If it's for a documented occurrence of a terrestrial con site, it's an actual within the project area in 100 feet. For stream conservation sites, because now we've buffered them with the uplands, we're doing a direct intersect as we do with the predicted suitable habitat models. So that is a change, and that is something that we will need to talk with folks about in terms of changing it in the application suite also, to make sure that the stream conservation sites are now a direct impact rather than a 100-foot buffer, because we have now buffered them. But this is just the information that you have, and you see as you get your preliminary report if you have to submit the project through the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the evaluations that go on. So the Conservation Application Suite contains our information. We provide that, and that is updated, as well as Predicted Suitable Habitat Summary, the PSHS that I was showing earlier. So those are in the suite already, and they're updated on a quarterly basis. So when, components that are ground disturbing are digitized in the application suite, the system automatically performs a spatial query for any of the documented RT&E resources. Again, terrestrial conservation sites are the ones now that we are looking at within the project area, also within 100 feet of a ground disturbing BMP, and or predicted suitable habitat species models, and the stream conservation sites directly intersecting the ground disturbing BMP component. And then the result of the query is documented in the spatial data section of the component. So basically, soil and water conservation districts are doing internal screening to say, do we have any concerns? And if there aren't any intersects for certain layers, or they aren't within 100 feet of other layers of natural heritage resource data, then what is happening is there's no need to further coordinate with us. And that is really helpful, I think, for both soil and water conservation districts and for DCR natural heritage, because those projects where we don't have concerns are being screened out immediately through that conservation suite. And so at that point, if you don't have a report return where it's showing any kind of intersect or within 100 foot of a terrestrial conservation site, then that project has been cleared for potential impacts to natural heritage resources. So that's a really good thing and helps things move quickly. And this is just an example out of the conservation suite showing what potential results you may end up with. Here you see, which is still the old data, the stream conservation unit, but you also see predicted suitable habitats. So in any scenario with this would then trigger you submitting the project through the Natural Heritage Data Explorer at this point, because you have gotten a hit on both the stream conservation unit and you've gotten a hit on 3 different predicted suitable habitat models, one for the Madison Cave isopod, one for the wood turtle, and then an area that's both Madison Cave isopod and wood turtle. So that would kind of be the trigger if you got this from the report from the conservation suite stating that, okay, I now need to do something further. This is also just showing an example of predicted suitable habitat results, showing there at the bottom that you don't have an actual, you have an intersect with predicted suitable habitat summary. You don't necessarily have an intersect on this project with rare species or natural communities, but because you do with the predicted suitable habitat summary for golden darter, emerald darter, or shiner, yellowfin mad tom, and Ohio pigtoe, that you would need to coordinate with us. So I'm just trying to show some examples from the report that would trigger coordination. So at this point, you would then, upload the shapefile that's generated out of the conservation application suite and attach the BMP map export and ground disturbing component shapefile that was all generated from that suite to the Virginia Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And then that would initiate our review to provide feedback regarding potential impacts to natural heritage resources, including karst resources and any predicted suitable habitat intersects in terms of what's being proposed. Now, we understand, and I know I've said this in the past, that many of the projects that are being proposed by soil and water conservation districts are going to be beneficial to the resources in the long term. It's normally just our concerns in the immediate future where we're having potential E&S concerns or other concerns for that initial installation of the project, but understanding long term, we're going to get benefits from that. So I just wanted to mention that again. So this is an example of upload a shapefile into NHDE. And this is the shapefile maybe showing alternative water source, so water lines, and that could be uploaded into our system. It accepts shapefiles instead of having to heads up digitize, and that's the easiest way, and that's what's being generated out of the application suite. So that's really, a great fit for submitting projects through NHDE. So in terms of ground disturbing, I'm going to talk about it here within the application suite, and then we're going to talk about it again about now submitting through NHDE. This is another change that's associated with the stream conservation sites. But for the conservation application suite, that automatically exports those components that are defined by NRCS as ground disturbing. And those are just examples, waterline stream crossings. What needs to be submitted to NHDE is, all of those components. Now, there's a limitation for NHDE that you cannot submit more than one polygon at a time. So because of that, if you have multiple components of ground disturbance that should be looked at, you're going to need to then draw a polygon as close as possible to those components to capture them all for submittal into NHDE. And again, it will be key that that polygon be as precise as possible surrounding those components so that you don't capture other things such as, you are, you know, a half a mile away from the actual component and you're intersecting a conservation site, where if you were just to submit the component by itself, that you would not intersect that conservation site. So please be aware of that. And I'm going to show you some examples in just a moment. The BMP map is extremely helpful for us, the aerial map, because when we're reviewing the projects, it's showing us where the various activities are being proposed. And if there is a concern where the, you know, resources are compared to where those components are, then that's really helping us make that determination on whether we think there's going to be impact or not. So we very much appreciate attaching that BMP map that is produced out of the conservation suite. Ground disturbing component shapefile that can be exported again from the suite is a zipped folder, which is what we need for it to be uploaded into NHDE and can be attached to the project submittal in NHDE just like any other file. And again, because we're not able to accept multiple polygons, this shapefile helps us to confirm or cross-reference to make sure that we are looking at the project correctly. We know where the ground disturbing components are. If they're close to a conservation site, whether we're making a recommendation or not, it's just an additional piece of information that really helps us in our review of the project to make sure that we're accurately reviewing the project and understanding what's being proposed and where those activities are occurring. And this is just a slide showing where you can find this within the conservation suite. I know I do this training on a yearly basis, and I don't know if there have been any changes to this over time, but it is where I believe they still reside, and you can pull these down and export this information as needed to attach for your submittal into the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. And these are good examples of maps really telling us where things are being proposed, such as fencing, water lines, wells. And so with this, it really is helpful for us to know, again, along with the shapefile that can be exported of where these components are actually located. And this is just showing another great map, and really appreciate those folks that have taken the time to attach these as they submit the projects through NHDE. And then this talks about the, you know, the ground disturbing, components of what's being proposed for the project, again, out of the conservation suite application. And this is our focus as to what we're commenting on. And this is just showing a screen capture from NHDE where you can attach that BMP map, or where you can attach that shapefile, the ground disturbing components, basically just by clicking on choose file, then you navigate to where those files are located, and then you click upload, and that's showing that to you. And then when we receive the project through NHDE, at the bottom here, you can see we basically are able to click on the BMP topo map PDF, or you were able to show the soil map PDF. So those are really helpful to us, and it is pretty easy to upload these, and we just appreciate that as you submit projects. As I mentioned, and this is just reiterating this, I think directions that are available for the application suite about this idea that if you have multiple ground disturbing components, that you have to then create a polygon that surrounds those components, and therefore submitting this larger polygon. And again, the closer you can make that polygon to the extent of those ground disturbing components, the more accurate the information is going to be that we provide back to you. We certainly want to review projects and make sure that, you know, there aren't any impacts, and give you information to help avoid and minimize those impacts. But we also don't want to give you, too much information, meaning we gave you within a half a mile buffer of the ground disturbing components, which really doesn't make sense and creates more work for everybody. So the more focused and the more accurate you can make that polygon, the better you're going to get information back from us that's applicable and is applying to those ground disturbing components. So, and these are just examples showing this. I don't know if you can see this. So, the project contains sinkholes, happens a lot of times out west. And, the sinkholes are not intersected by the ground disturbing component, which is actually shown there in the red. However, if you submitted what was in the purple as a polygon, it would capture that and you'd automatically get karst recommendations for sinkholes. So again, if you're having to draw a bounding box around the ground disturbing components, it's just really important for you to identify the areas where those components actually are, rather than drawing it much larger. And with that, again, it could mean the difference between getting back, a response in 5 minutes through the preliminary report in HDE, or then triggering us to have to do further review and waiting 30 calendar days. So just again, it's about the accuracy and thinking, hey, I just need to capture these 3 different components and make that polygon as tight as possible around the 3 components, and then you will get accurate information back from both NHDE and follow-up from us. And this is showing in another example. Up in the top there of the map, you see the green polygon, which is a terrestrial conservation site. You see in red the actual ground disturbing component that's being reviewed, but the purple outline is showing the larger polygon that was actually heads up digitized to try to capture that ground disturbing component. If it was pulled down a little bit there from the north to the south just to capture the very top of that ground disturbing component, it would not have had an intersect or within 100 feet of the conservation site, and again would have not required further coordination with us. So just to reemphasize our screening process, when a project submitted through NHDE, 100-foot buffer is created around the project boundary, and then the buffered project site is checked against the documented natural heritage resources layer. And that is still true for our terrestrial conservation sites and our karst conservation sites. However, as I've mentioned, because of the change with the stream conservation sites instead of units, and they're now buffered with upland around them, that those will be a direct intersect as the predicted suitable habitat summary layer is. So that is a change from what has been going on in the past, but this is just kind of explaining the screening process. So once that project area, either buffered or non-buffered, intersects with a natural heritage data layer, then if that hit occurs, then that triggers us from a DCR perspective to evaluate whether there's potential impact from the proposed project or not and make appropriate recommendations. And as you already know, if you have an intersect with the predicted suitable habitat, you may hear from us. We recommend a survey based on our inventory staff reviewing the project and providing those comments to us for inclusion in our follow-up comment letter. So that's really a very basic overview of our screening process. Now, something that has changed also, along with having stream conservation sites instead of stream conservation units, is that we, in the submittal in NHDE, as I mentioned, coming very soon, you will have to start identifying for the ground disturbing components that you're submitting for review, whether there's in-stream work required, and whether they, in these categories, are determined as a major ground disturbing activity or a minor ground disturbing activity. That indication of what is being proposed is going to trigger a particular comment from NHDE. It could be just standardized language about ENS, or it could be that we recommend, that we review it further. So this is something new that's going to be released as the stream conservation sites are released. Please note the water lines that most of you are proposing for alternative water sources are not considered large pipelines in the major ground disturbing section. So if you're proposing a water line, that's a couple inches, we're not comparing that or incorporating that as we would a large 42-inch pipeline that's being proposed under major ground disturbing activities. If you read through these and you don't find any that apply to you, then NA is what you should check. But you will find as you submit the project through the Natural Heritage Data Explorer that you have to check one of these boxes. You can check multiple boxes if you have multiple activities that are identified, but you have to check at least one box to move forward. So what I mean by that, you will have to say yes or no to in-stream work, and you will have to either identify a major ground disturbing activity that you're doing, or you will need to check an NA. Same thing with minor ground disturbing activities. Either check one of those or multiple ones of those activities, or you will need to check the NA box. If you don't do that, once we release this new update, you will find that we are, that the project won't be able to be submitted. So that is just a change. And like I said, it's coming in the next couple of days that you will see. Happy to answer any questions around that, but just wanted to make that clear to you, that this is something you will start seeing in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer. We've had it on our information services order form where people do not use the Explorer to submit projects for several months now, but now NHDE is in line with that and has these different major ground disturbing and minor ground disturbing components. But just again to emphasize, the water lines that we're seeing for alternative water sources are not considered under the major ground disturbing activities. These are for large pipelines for gas and other utility transmission lines that we see in other projects. So just to give a really quick kind of flowchart summary about procedure for submissions of projects. So we mentioned submit to the conservation application suite. And then if there's a hit and intersect on that report, and we saw some examples of that, then the next step will be to submit to the Natural Heritage Data Explorer the project and to get feedback from us. And that feedback can come in different forms, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. And so again, building on this, at that point, you've submitted it through the NHDE Explorer that's shown there on top, and either you're going to get what we consider a no conflict report, where you have hits on resources, but based on ground disturbing activities and resource standard comments, we don't really feel like there's a need for us to further review it. And we're going to make those recommendations in the preliminary report stating what we recommend, ENS, ecological cores, CARS recommendations, and we'll look at some examples of those letters. Or you're going to submit that project through NHDE and you're going to have a hit on resources, and we feel like we need to do additional survey, review, what have you, for that particular project, and you'll get those comments back from us in 30 calendar days. So those are the two types of scenarios that can happen by submitting to NHDE. You're going to get a no conflict situation report, and that'll have its recommendations already in that report, and you can move forward with the project. Or we think there's potential for impact and we need to further review it. And in that situation, it's going to be 30 calendar days before we can provide you that information. So what will our comment letter say? Well, I have in red there a no comment. And you normally are not going to see that, because remembering that the conservation's module will filter out those no comments, right? You will submit the project through that suite. If you get no hits on natural heritage resources, then you don't need to do anything further with us. It has been filtered out. But I listed there just so you're aware. That's where you're going to get your no comments from. If you submit the project after getting a hit on natural heritage resource through NHDE, then the options here in black are what possibly you could get feedback for. You get a hit and we look at it and we're like, no, we don't think this is really going to impact the resource that's been documented, or it's not going to impact potential habitat for a resource. And so we think there's a no adverse impact situation, and we call it a no impact comment letter. And so you possibly might get that. You may have a situation, and I was just talking about this, where we call it a no conflict, that yes, there are resources there, for instance, karst resources, but because of the scope of the project and the distance to the resources, we're going to make some standard recommendations for avoidance and minimization, and there's not going to be any additional coordination needed. That's also true now for the aquatic resource comments, the stream conservation sites, that again, there will be standard recommendations for avoidance or minimization of impacts to aquatic resources, and no additional coordination will be needed. So for some of you, of course, out west in the state, you've been getting the standard karst comments, where it gives you recommendations in that preliminary report out of NHDE. And then at the bottom, there's a highlighted sentence saying, this will be the only information you will receive from our agency, and there will be no further correspondence. So in that situation, that's when you're getting those recommendations up front in that preliminary report, and there's no further coordination coming from us. The standard aquatic resource comments will be the same, and these are going to be applied, of course, across, Virginia, because we have so many different streams and creeks and so forth that support rare resources. So some of you that haven't seen these comments before, as others have in the western part of the state for karst, you'll start seeing something similar for aquatic resource comments also. Another option is we review the project and say, yeah, we do have some concerns here about potential impacts to resources, and then we provide recommendations to try to avoid and minimize those impacts. All of our letters will also contain standard information. Again, we're non-regulatory, so for state and federally listed species, when we recommend coordination with the appropriate agency, depending on what resource we're commenting on. If we're commenting on maybe salamander, it is state listed, we are going to recommend coordination with DWR. If it is smooth coneflower, that's both state and federally listed, we're going to make recommendations for those agencies. VDACs is kind of a unique scenario. We have a memorandum of agreement with them where we are doing the initial screening for state listed plants and insects. If we then determine that they are documented within the project footprint and are going to be impacted from the proposed project, then at that point, we actually recommend coordination with VDACs, because they have the regulatory authority for those particular resources. But through that MOA, we can do some initial screening and screen out projects we don't think there will be impacts, and then there'll be no further coordination. So you're going to see that comment. We're also going to make a disclaimer that the absence of any natural heritage resources may indicate the site has not been surveyed. I mentioned to you a couple years ago, we thought we were like 10% of the state that we had surveyed. So there's a lot of private lands and so forth, and even public lands that we have not surveyed. We always support activities to improve water quality, and you will hear that, see that in our letters. I mentioned it earlier that we know that many of the activities that you're doing are going to provide long-term benefit for water quality, and we support those efforts. We always recommend the use of native species during plantings, and we do see those particular projects from time to time. And so just thinking that way, we have a Virginia native plant finder you can jump on if you're not sure what is native for that region, and actually identify a list if that's helpful. And I'm happy to share that with folks. And then the final thing in our letter, you're going to see that as we've been talking about pretty much throughout this presentation today, that our information is constantly changing. From an NHDE perspective and internally, that's being updated every 3 months. And so we're saying in our letters that if it's been 6 months since you've had this project reviewed and you've received information, that you should be resubmitting that for an update. And NHDE makes it very easy that you can just kind of click on the project report. You open it up, it has generated a shapefile there for whatever was input in for that project, whether you heads up digitize it or you uploaded a shapefile. Hopefully you uploaded a shapefile from the conservation suite, that information is already there and can easily be resubmitted. So please realize that that option is available. So this is just kind of an overview of what our letters could say and some standard information that you will see in our letters throughout. And these are just examples of preliminary reports coming out of NHDE. In this situation, this report letter that's at the end of the report is telling you that there was an intersect with a natural heritage resource, whether it be documented within the submitted project boundary and including a 100-foot buffer or directly intersecting predicted habitat models. So this is what we consider a hit letter, meaning that you've had some resources that should have been shown from the report that you gained from the conservation application suite, and then submitting this through NHDE would have given you this report letter back. And at this point, it's going to trigger us to do further review. And this is the situation where it's going to take us 30 days to provide comments. And this is just showing the actual cover sheet for that particular report. This is an example of a soil and water conservation district project, and providing that information that you're inputting and that the application's actually generating, things like, you know, what quadrangles is it intersecting, what counties, the lat long, acreage, etc. And then your contact information's there at the bottom. And this is the cover sheet for every report that you receive out of NHDE as you submit the project. And then this is a map that was, you know, very helpful in our review, identifying where things are being proposed, where the, you know, proposed pipeline is going, where's, you know, a particular planned crossing, exact information of where project activities are occurring within the project footprint. And then this is, as I showed before, just what information you're going to get back as a tier 2 user. You're going to get this information about the conservation site, the intersecting predictive models, and if any resources are within, you know, 100 feet of the project area, you'll also see those resources listed that are associated with the conservation site. This is a map showing what was actually inputted as a shapefile or heads up digitized. It shows there's a predictive model here. The red outlines the 100-foot buffer. The black is the actual project boundary, and showing that. And then you have a stream conservation SKU, which is what we're still working in until we update to the stream conservation sites running through the project area there in the magenta line. And then again, showing, you know, natural heritage resources have been documented and that it's, you know, or predicted suitable habitat models, which it's really both. And this is going to trigger us to review the project and provide comments within 30 calendar days. So then looking at the karst, as I mentioned, some of you are already familiar with this. Those folks out in the West are getting this information from time to time, depending on what's being proposed and where. Just in terms of this particular soil and water conservation project, in terms of, exclusion, fencing, water system and crossing. It's talking about no stream bank disturbance. And this is intersecting in our predicted models, as you can see, with the karst bedrock and the Madison Cave isopod. And now you have standardized recommendations that are included up front in the preliminary report that you get from NHDE. So once you submit your project through NHDE, you're getting a report back in 5 to 10 minutes, and that information would be in that report. And this is the map showing that information, predicted suitable habitat models there in the salmon color that's basically filling the entire area of the map. And then notice the report here, and this is what I was talking about. So you get this information, if you look at the second paragraph that talks about that as indicated in the Natural Heritage Data Explorer report table, karst resource screening layers and or karst resource predicted suitable habitat models have been documented within the submitted project boundary, including a 100-foot buffer. And DCR recommends adherence to the recommendations included in this report to minimize impacts to karst resources. So we're telling you there's something there. It's karst related. But if you look at the last paragraph and what's highlighted, it says this report represents DCR recommendations for this project, and no additional correspondence will be sent from this office. So it tells you this is it. What you've gotten in the preliminary report are our recommendations for trying to avoid and minimize impacts to karst resources, and you're not going to get anything as a follow-up from us. So just please pay attention to the entire report, and especially to the last page, which is the report letter that's telling you what's going to happen next or what's not going to happen next. In this scenario, you're not going to get any further correspondence from us. It's your preliminary report that you have, and that's all information we will provide. So then, as I mentioned, coming very, very soon, we're going to start looking at this from a stream conservation site situation. You see that there in the table. And as you can see, there's automated aquatic resource recommendations that are occurring there based on the intersect and based on the logic in the background that's happening for the query. It's spitting out this information about minimizing adverse impacts to the aquatic ecosystem, which is basically our ENS. It also shows concerns for ecological cores that we talked about earlier, and just again giving you some ways to avoid and minimize those impacts. This just shows those occurrences. Well, basically, it's the wood turtle showing that that has a predicted suitable habitat model that's been intersected by the project, and that the ENS is going to be our recommendation. But as you saw with the karst recommendations for these particular aquatic recommendations, this will be what we're going to provide in our preliminary report, and there will not be any further correspondence coming from our office. So we're trying to balance, the increase in area covered by the stream conservation sites and the number of projects that will be seeing that you will have to submit with these standardized recommendations, similar to what we've done with karst in the past, thinking that they are appropriate and will minimize impacts, and that the project could move forward with not having to wait an additional 30 days. So this is very similar to what we've already done with karst, that we're now implementing this for aquatic resources. So please just, again, once you receive your preliminary report, please, pay attention to what that last page states on what are next steps. And so this is a situation that I just wanted to mention, but I also wanted to make note of this no comment situation. So I'm very pleased to say this year we have not received any projects from Soil and Water that are no comments, which is perfect, because remember, those no comment projects should not need to be submitted through NHDE. They're being submitted into the conservation application suite and then filtered out there, not needing any further coordination with us. But I just wanted to point out, if you find yourself getting a report back that looks like this, that shows nothing in the table, nothing on the map, and then the last page states, according to information currently in biotics, natural heritage resources have not been documented within the submitted project boundary, including a 100-foot buffer, as well as predicted suitable habitat models not intersecting, that it's a project that you didn't need to submit if you get anything like this. But I'm just very happy to say, I think we got a couple the year before, but we haven't gotten any of this year. So thank you for paying attention to that and the information that's coming out of the application suite report, realizing I don't need to coordinate this with DCR natural heritage, because I've already gotten the clearance or, that response back that I needed initially. But I just wanted to bring this up because I think it is something we need to just mention, and hopefully continue along the path we're on, that this is all being filtered out at the application suite level. So with that, I will stop talking and be happy to answer any questions you might have, and really appreciate everyone's time today.
Renee, there are a couple questions in the chat. I don't know if you're able to see that, or I can read those to you.
It might be easier if you read them. Oh, I just was able to open them up, but it might be easier just to read them, Carl, if you don't mind.
Yeah, not a problem. The first one was, how accurate would you call the predicted suitable habitat for the Madison Cave isopod to indicate a connection between what happens on the land and karst features below?
So it is the best that we have. Do I think any of the resource models could be improved? The answer is yes to that, and they are looked at on a quarterly basis for updates. The concerns there are that you have some type of, activity causing sedimentation that goes through a sinkhole that gets into the subterranean, areas that are supporting the Madison Cave isopod. And so we're doing our best to, make that model as accurate as possible based on the data that we have. As I mentioned, there's a lot of work to do in terms of inventory around this resource and other resources we track. But I feel like it is the best that we have at this point, and think that it will improve over time, especially as more surveys are conducted and that negative data is incorporated into the model to exclude areas where we know that they've been looked for and haven't been found. So like I said, I think it will just continue to improve over time.
Okay. The next one refers to the new checklist. That if they are putting in water pipelines and it's not considered the major disturbance, is there a different section they should be checking, or just check no NA?
Right. So it is a situation that if they didn't have any of those other activities as proposed under major ground disturbing, they would check NA. And then in the minor ground disturbance, it depends on how that water pipeline is being installed. Is it, being hand dug, etc.? I don't know that answer, but if that's true, then they could check that box under minor. Otherwise, if none of the activities apply to what's being proposed, then both would be checked as NA.
Okay. If you have any other questions, feel free to pop them in real quick, and we'll try and get them answered before we let Renee go. This is a your best chance to get an answer for everybody to hear and know that response. Again, while we wait just a minute or two to see if anybody has any follow-up questions or further questions, one, I would like to thank Renee for another training for us as we continue working on our resource reviews. Two, that again, if you have not registered for the afternoon session or tomorrow morning session, and you need that for either certification or your contact hours, make sure you follow those registration links from the emails and get that done so that you can get those credits that are needed. Otherwise, I am not seeing anything come in yet, Renee.
Okay, well, I appreciate the opportunity to present natural heritage information. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the training, you know, the user guide manual is a great resource, but if you don't find the answer there, please reach out and we will be happy to help you and direct you on where that information may be. Or if you need help with project submittal, we're happy to help with that also. But I do appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone.
Thank
and
you.
we will see you at 1 p.m. for the Department of Wildlife Resources.